So welcome to the webinar, those that are on the line and on the phone. And another quick reminder just to make sure that if you're joining by phone or by Skype, to keep your line muted. We're expecting many participants today, so just as courtesy to the rest of the people on the call so that everybody has some clear audio, just to keep the lines muted. A quick agenda of what we're planning for today. So I'm just going to start off by giving a brief overview of the challenge. So I know that most of the individuals who are on the line or who have registered to participate in the webinar today, I recognize a lot of names from previous webinars or from applications that are already in development in the system, but I still just wanted to the applications and to try and speak to many people at the same time and get the answers out there. So just as a quick, if you have any questions as we're moving through the beginning of this webinar, just a little reminder about submitting your questions. So due to the number of people that we have on the line today, we're going to ask that you please submit your questions via either the chat box to the left of the Skype window. If you're participating via Skype, you can just type your questions in there and we'll collect them and answer them during the Q&A period. Or if you're joining by phone, you could submit your questions to the solutions2030@oce-ontario.org email address. So that is also, as I said earlier, the same email address that would have sent you the confirmation for your participation in the webinar today. So you can just respond to that email and put your questions into the queue. We're going to try and answer as many of the questions as we can today. I actually we've allotted this time from 10 to 11, but on this end we are free after 11 as well too. So if there are additional questions, I think we're just going to try and keep going until we address as much as possible. And yeah, so let's get started. So starting off with a little bit of the background about where this challenge came from. So the Ontario Solutions 2030 Challenge is an initiative of Ontario's Green Investment Fund. So why is this important? So the Green Investment Fund was a forward on the cap and trade revenue, or the anticipated cap and trade revenue from the cap and trade system in Ontario. As you may know, we've now had 3 successful auctions, the third of which the results were announced over the last couple of days. So there is now funds sort of flowing into those cap and trade accounts, and this money in Ontario is legislated to be allocated to projects that help to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the province. So Ontario Centres of Excellence, the organization that's running the Solutions 2030 Challenge, we've been tasked really to work with the industry component of Ontario's businesses to help run some mitigation projects to help them meet reduction targets now and into the future. So Ontario Solutions 2030 Challenge is an initiative of this Target GHG program that I mentioned from OCE. So this program, of which there are several different streams for technologies at different sort of levels of development. The Solutions 2030 Challenge is really the part of this program that is the most forward-looking. So it's really looking at what types of technologies can we support and enable today that will help us meet the reduction targets in 2030. Some of the components of the Target GHG program are focused at much nearer term reduction targets. So our Stream 1 projects are really focused on what can we do right now to implement technologies that can help meet reduction targets for 2020. And then the Stream 2 of that program is really looking at how can we enable maybe some of the more near-term technologies to commercialize and deploy a little bit more quickly. So Ontario Solutions 2030 Challenge was launched in spring of 2017. So it's been open since April, with the deadline for submissions coming up next week on September 22nd. So the challenge statement. So Ontario Solutions 2030 Challenge is really an open innovation competition. So the intention with this is, rather than setting rigid eligibility and then getting different projects that fit those eligibility criteria to sort of apply. What we've done with this challenge is we're really posing a question or a challenge to the community, and we're looking for your best ideas, responses in a more open eligibility format. So we're open to ideas that are coming in from teams that may be outside of Ontario. We're looking for teams that may be in academia, in companies, in large companies, or just inventors. So it's an open innovation challenge. So the challenge statement is transformative technologies drive change, whether evolutionary, revolutionary, or disruptive. Ontario is seeking transformative technologies that can offer cost-effective greenhouse gas reductions for manufacturing and industrial processes to drive systemic transformations across sectors and position Ontario as a global leader in building a low-carbon future. So really, the challenge, as it's stated here, is what is your idea to help our industry and our industry in Ontario meet the reduction targets in 2030? So what we recognize that that for many of these industries that are carbon intensive, there is an innovation challenge around helping them to meet those sort of future reduction targets, if in line with provincial targets would be 37% below 1990 levels by 2030. We recognize that there's an innovation challenge in there for many of these industries. So we're looking for these really forward-looking technologies that might help to enable these future reductions. So eligibility, I've already quickly touched on this in talking about the open nature of the challenge, but I also have been getting a lot of questions about this from teams in the lead up to the deadline. So I just wanted to reiterate, we utilize the terminology on all of the forms and everything of teams, rather than in a lot of other OCE programs, we would use the terminology of applicant. So we use the terminology of teams under this challenge just to try and keep it even more open than in some of our other programs. So teams could be made up of individuals, it could be companies, it could be academics, it could be students, and it could be companies of any stage of development. It could be a startup company that is working to build a business around a part of the intellectual property that they may be applying with. It could be an established company that is starting a new product line, or it could even be one of the large industrial facilities in Ontario that is looking to commercialize a technology that they use in-house to help them meet emissions reductions. Teams could be one of these types of organizations or a combination of multiple organizations. The terminology of team does not mean that you need to have more than one organization in a partnership. To be eligible and to apply for this challenge, you do not need to have an industry partner or a customer engaged at this stage of the application process. I've been getting a lot of questions about that. Well, I think having the interest or engagement of a future customer shows traction with early stage companies and technologies, and it sort of helps to validate. It is not a eligibility criteria under the challenge, and I would say that it wouldn't necessarily be a differentiating factor within the review process. So if you do not have that customer relationship in place, don't worry, I still would encourage you to develop an application. So international entries are welcome. So under this challenge, we recognize that Ontario industry and this innovation challenge, we're open to these ideas coming from anywhere in the world that are interested in engaging and helping our industry to reduce emissions. But that being said, for those of you who may be developing international entries, just make sure that you're grounding your entry in the Ontario case study or context, and make sure that you're really speaking to the challenges that we have here and how you are able to help us. Teams must commit to working in Ontario. So again, the intention with this challenge is to identify solutions that will help Ontario industry to reduce emissions. So we're looking for you to develop an entry and propose a solution that that you have interest in helping us to deploy here in Ontario. Competition funds must be spent on a scope of work to be executed in Ontario. So while international or companies from outside of Ontario within Canada, we are very interested in having you apply and seeing your solutions. But again, this is another piece that's of the challenge and the eligibility criteria that's really trying to root the work and the solutions to be executed in an Ontario context. And finally, that the participation in the 2030 challenge does not affect eligibility for other OCE programs. So for those who may be developing applications on the line who may have experience with OCE, either with commercialization programs or other programs within our target GHG portfolio of programs, this would not affect your eligibility for that and would not exclude you from consideration in future rounds of any of those funds. A little bit more, I've been getting a lot of questions leading up to the deadline about the target markets. So this really, what we're talking about industry, we're talking about the large industrial facilities in Ontario. So these are really the entities in Ontario that are capped under Ontario's cap and trade system and participating in that market. You could also develop an application around a industry in Ontario that may not be currently participating in the cap and trade market, but still has a significant greenhouse gas footprint that you could help to reduce within the province of Ontario. And we'll get to this later, but if you are choosing to focus choosing your target market to be a sector that's not currently regulated, then we will want you to, within the application, really show us why that target market is important to address to help meet future emissions targets. So showing, I guess, the scale of that, the potential for you to help that industry reduce emissions. And I also want to say that there is a lot of potential to develop applications around some of these industries that may not be regulated. And because the point of regulation within the cap and trade system is really at direct emissions at the facilities, many of either these facilities or other industries that are responsible for a very substantial portion of Ontario's current greenhouse gas emissions are not currently regulated. So, but we would just want you to be able to articulate to us just rough estimates of what the scale of those emissions are. So target market continued. So this is this table is also in the challenge guidelines. So this is just looking at a breakdown of some of the types of industries that are regulated under the cap and trade system. And you'll see down at the bottom, I've included a link that will take you directly to the Ontario, and I will be circulating this PowerPoint presentation afterwards as well too. But I've included a link that will take you to the Government of Ontario site where they publish all of the emissions reporting from these facilities. This may be very useful for some of the teams in helping to develop their entries and making the case sort of for the size of the emissions in the market that they're targeting, and also to help them to develop some estimates around their greenhouse gas, the potential reductions that they can make. So now we'll get into the part where we get to the entry process. So I wanted to start off just by doing I guess a quick tutorial of how to enter the challenge. So before we get into the entry form, I just wanted to, so a complete entry includes, so there's several pages within the online entry form. So a complete entry includes the team lead contact information. So this would be the individual that the team is designating as the one that OCE will be reaching out to regarding the progress of the application through review and the challenge. An eligibility acknowledgement. So this is just a sort of acknowledgement that you understand some of the terms of the challenge. Team information. So this is information, just some basic demographic information about the team, as well as some questions that will be used by the reviewers to assess the sort of the capacity of the team to deliver. The entry form questions. So these are really the meat of the application form. The submission PowerPoint presentation, which is really a supplemental PowerPoint that has several slides. And so and we'll get to this later, but the intention with this PowerPoint presentation is not as a pitch deck. It's when you look at the downloadable version of the PowerPoint, it's to capture some images and content that we were unable to capture in the online submission form due to the formatting. As well as we'll talk briefly about some of the supplemental material that you may want to include in your application. So with that, let's get started and go into take a look at the application form. So hopefully everybody who is on the line has visited the Solutions 2030 website at this point. So here we are, homepage. So to enter, you can either enter now button or go to the how to enter page. So taking a look at the how to enter page, so this entry button will take you right through to the online entry form. But if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's also a section of useful downloads. So this includes the challenge guidelines to give you a little bit more insight into both the process, but also there's some information in here that could help you to frame a good application. The eligible expenses document, which I think is important to have a look at this stage in the competition, but because we're not asking you to create a budget, this will will become more important in later phases of the assessment for those that are invited to the full application stage. The sample entry questions. So the sample entry questions are really it's the entry questions that are included within the entry form if you wanted to download that and work offline, and a copy of the PowerPoint that I was just speaking about, including the instructions about what's to be included. So we'll just move on through to the entry form. So here we are in the form stack interface. So and I've actually already started one of the applications over here. So the first page of the entry form is very, very straightforward. It's just the contact information and do remember that this will be the email address and the phone number that we will be using as OCE to contact you regarding your application and any next steps. So just make sure that the information in here is accurate and also is the proper individual who's part of your team that you want us to be connecting with. Moving on to the eligibility acknowledgement page. So I just want to quickly go through the eligibility acknowledgement questions in here because we get lots of questions about this. So challenge prize funds will cover up to 50% of eligible project costs to a maximum of $250,000 for entries that are selected to proceed to phase 2. So this is an acknowledgement of the cash match requirement on the Solutions 2030 challenge. So for the prizes at the different phases of this challenge, you will be required to match any of the funding that you leverage through this challenge. And if you have any questions for me about maybe how this will work, what types of funding would be eligible for use as a cash match. If you have any scenarios you want to put forward, I'm happy to talk to you about this. But it's a very important criteria that we want to make sure that everybody's aware of before they submit an application, that they will be to leverage the funding if awarded at the end of this assessment phase. They will be required to show the proof of matching funds. So number 2, if selected, proceed to phase 2. Teams from outside of Ontario are expected to establish a presence in Ontario before receiving the funding. So this, again, as I think we spoke about earlier in the presentation, for teams that are not currently located in Ontario, part of the statement of this challenge and the goal of this challenge is to help find ideas that will help Ontario to solve our problems. So, or solve not our problems, but the challenge that we have around emissions reduction from industry. So we want to see a very if you're located outside of Ontario, we want to see you coming to Ontario and helping and really directly working in this context and with our industry to help solve the challenges. So we want to see that the funds, both number 3, the funds will cover only activities in Ontario, and that the teams, if selected, will establish some sort of presence here in order to compete in the challenge and receive the funding. All right, so next, after the eligibility acknowledgement, we have the team information. So the team information is a little bit different from that first tab, which was the lead contact information, in that this information is more used to assess the origin and background of the team as a whole. So this city and province, state, and country of the base point of the team may be different from that of the individual who's identified as the lead applicant. So relatively straightforward. A quick note, if you're planning to develop, I've spoken with a few people who are planning to develop more than one entry. If you are planning to develop more than one entry, I do ask that you differentiate between the different entries in the team name, if possible, so we don't get them confused, because this will be one of the key ways that we're referencing the applications going forward. This is relatively straightforward. Briefly describe your team in 500 characters or less. There's another question within the application questions that's similar to this, but this is more intended to be a very short blurb, more for sort of marketing purposes rather than assessment by the reviewers. And I just also wanted to use this opportunity to show, so the text boxes within the application form do have maximum character counts. So looking here, I've pasted part of the guidelines in, and it will not, if you look at me trying to type additional information in, it will not let me paste in anything beyond what's in the character count. So just be very aware when you're developing your entries offline, especially with some of the longer responses, to ensure that you're keeping track of your character count. What categorization best describes your technology? This is really just I understand that there's a lot of different types of technologies that are interested in applying under this challenge. So just find something of best fit or create your own categorization. This team member piece, it's a sort of sliding box, so you can add more team members, I believe up to 12 as it goes down. And then the social media, we are looking for, and this is really to, if you give us your social media accounts, we're interested in following you back and keeping you engaged with the competition. So now on to the meat of the application, being the entry form questions. So just a quick overview about, I guess, best practices for developing your entry form questions. I highly recommend that while you're working on your entry questions, that you do it offline outside of the application form to make sure that the data that you're creating is saved at any given point. To just give a little bit of, so that this form does not automatically save your content. I'm just going to go through and do a quick little, so at the bottom of all of these pages within the entry form, there is this save and resume later button. When I click, get a save link, And you will want to either keep a document where you're saving the most up-to-date, and it really is the most up-to-date version of this link, or send it to your email inbox to keep tabs on it. Took me right back to the beginning again. So getting into the entry form, I highly suggest that you utilize the downloadable version of the entry questions, work offline while keeping track of your character count. If you want more character count within these text boxes, you can delete these sub-questions from the entry form. That will buy you a little bit of extra space, and the reviewers will have a full list of the questions, so don't worry about them. Just try and keep the A, B, C, D included in here. I guess so. Yeah, delete the sub questions. So, and another little note about the character count. I know that in some places this may be restrictive for some of you developing entries. As you're going through, you may find, and also because of the diversity of the different types of technologies that are applying for the challenge, as you go through, there might be some questions that are much more applicable to your technology than others, and so you may want to expand on some, limit your answer on other ones, and that's fine. All right, so now let's go through some of these questions sort of one by one. So describe your technology in under 500 characters. So you'll notice that within this form, this is the question that's been allotted the largest word count. This is a very important question within the entry form. It really will help to give the reviewers a sense of what your technology is and contextualize it within some of Ontario's challenges, and also to help them to evaluate as we said, the transformative nature of the technology, but then also its basis in sort of reality and science. So you can use within here, you can reference out to papers, or you can keep it simple and just provide a layman's terms. We're very open as long as you clearly describe what the technology you're developing is. Also remember that as we go later into the application form, in the PowerPoint deck, we will ask for a systems diagram, so you can utilize that as well too as part of your explanation and refer out to that. That could be helpful. Looking at the sub-questions, the question B, what are the inputs and outputs of the process? This could vary greatly depending on the type of technology that we're looking at. If you have any questions or want to run a scenario by me, or don't understand how your technology might fit into this, do let me know, and I could help you to conceptualize that. How is your technology integrated into existing facilities? So I know that some of the technologies that may be applying might not be directly installed at a facility. That's okay, but in its place, if in this question you could explain how is it integrated into the, I guess, business as usual system. Where on the supply chain does your technology exist? Is it sort of earlier than the facilities that may be producing the emissions on the feedstock level? Is it an innovation that helps to green the power grid? Just sort of explain where it fits into the supply chain in an industrial context. And question D is in a way repeated in question 7, which is asking why is your technology transformational? But in D, really what we're looking for is how is your technology different from what exists currently in the market? So how does your technology differ from your competition? How does your technology differ from business as usual? Okay, on to question 2. Describe the current stage of development of your technology in under 2,500 characters. So really, What we're looking for here is a snapshot of where you are in the commercialization pathway of this technology. And another question I've been getting throughout the development of this of the challenge is that, so this challenge is open to technologies at any technology readiness level. You could be very early stage or you may be later stage. As long as the technology is not currently widely deployed for use in the target market that you're targeting in this application, you can develop an application, or so you can develop an entry for the challenge. We're really going to be evaluating these different TRL levels based on the rationality and the potential of the scope of work of the projects being proposed. So we will be able to evaluate these different TRLs against each other in the evaluation phase. But I just wanted to reiterate that whether you are early or later stage, it's okay. But question 2 is really just trying to get a snapshot of where you are in this process. So briefly describe the work you have done to validate the technology to date. You may not have done any work to validate the technology today. It could still be conceptual, but just if you've done some modeling or anything like that, talk about that in there. Has the technology been implemented elsewhere geographically or in another sector? This is, again, it may be applicable to some technologies. It may not be applicable to some technologies. So use your best judgment based on your technology. What is your IP protection strategy? So IP, in this question, you do not have to have patents and everything in place. This question is just sort of assessing whether this is like really what we're looking for. This will be an important part of the due diligence in later stages of the funding, but we want to get a sense of whether this is something you have explored and planned for in the development of your technology so far. So question number 4, describe the methodology for greenhouse gas reduction by your technology in under 2,500 characters. So I guess my main suggestions within this section are to always make sure that you're rooting your response to this question in the Ontario context. So keeping in mind some aspects of Ontario being that our electricity grid is relatively clean as compared to, say, the emissions intensity of electricity coming from the US. Just make sure that you're anchoring it in the Ontario case study or scenario, because that's where we're really looking to solve this challenge. So also in this section, you could do some, and we're just really looking for you to place it in the Ontario context by doing just some, it doesn't have to be intensive academic research, just basic market research and state your assumption. So the value proposition question, this is really thinking even outside of just the emissions reduction, which in Ontario has value with the cap and trade system, but what other aspects make your technology appealing to your customers? And then question D, propose a methodology of quantification for greenhouse gas reduction. This could be a response in terms of an explanation. You could also, in this section, propose a very basic equation that we could take a look at. And you can also just make sure that you have already provided information likely in sections A and B and build off of that to develop your method of quantification. And then additional environmental benefits. These are, and oftentimes when we are looking at greenhouse gas reduction projects, especially those that maybe reduce on-site combustion, things like that, there are often co-benefits from environmental co-benefits, so just make sure to talk about those there. Question number 5, economic benefits. So this is, I know that this is a section of the entry form that's been a little bit more challenging for some in terms of the equations, especially when your technologies are very early stage and you may not have a very clear idea of the costing structure that you may have in the future. We understand this. It's really, we're just looking for the information in this question to give us a very rough estimate of what you're anticipating the pricing structure and the potential of your technology to help Ontario reduce emissions is. So in question A, so it's the capital cost. So this is not dollar per CO2 reduction. This is really, and the reason that we phrased it like this, and I've been getting a lot of questions about this measure of dollar per ton CO2 reduction per year, and the dollar being in the capital cost of the installation, is really, we look at it this way through many of our OCE programs, because it helps us to get a clear idea of for the capital that we can allocate, or for the funding that we can allocate to a project, how much will that project eventually help to drive those sort of future wedges in greenhouse gas reductions in Ontario, which are measured in the tons per year. So that's why this that measure looks like this. If you're struggling with this, with finding a measure for this, let me know. I'm happy to help to run some different scenarios with you. So operational cost, again, this can be very high level. We're just looking for an estimate, and understand that with some of the very early stage technologies, this may be tricky, but it's really, so it's things like the operational costs are inputs such as feedstocks, electricity, the things like that. And it's really, with both of these questions, we're trying to get an idea of for the technology that you're proposing to be implemented, where, and it's really just a breakdown of, is it more capital intensive or is it more operational intensive, and what is the scale of the spend that would need to be made in either of these areas to achieve the reduction targets that we're looking for. So other potential economic benefits, this is a space where you can talk about anything else, any other benefits, economic benefits that would accrue from implementation of your technology. Describe why you are the right team to win the Solutions 2030 Challenge in under 1,250 characters. Really, this is just speaking to the capacity that your team, like, you need to show the capacity that your team has to execute and deliver and bring your technology to market. And I would say that the sub question B, what other expertise can you leverage, is as important as question A. So what networks, what support can you use to maybe fill some of those capacity gaps that may be in your team, especially with very early stage companies? Who have you engaged? Who can you trust to help you to bring this technology to market over the next 10 years? And then question number 7, describe why your solution is a transformational technology in under 1,250 characters. So this is really just what's the sort of wow factor on your technology? What makes it, and this is really a pitch of what makes it interesting, transformational, unique. Why is this important, and why should we be getting excited about it as we're reading your application? So then we get into the attachment section of the entry form. So, and I've got a copy of this PowerPoint open here. So for those of you who haven't had a look at the PowerPoint presentation that we're asking you to complete, again, I wanted to reiterate, this is not a pitch deck. This is some supplemental information that we were not able to include in the application because of the formatting of the form that we used. And so this is intended to fill some of the gaps that the reviewers would like to see in order to make a full assessment of the application. So this is a technology pitch. So this is a very brief, again, it's similar to what was already in the application, but like a very brief, pared down, why is your technology exciting? What differentiates you from your competition? a systems diagram. So this could take many different forms, but really, and this could help as a supplemental information to that first question in the entry form. So it's really like breaking down how does your technology work and where does it fit within the context of the customers that you're proposing to work with. A technology photo. Now, if your technology is still at a very early conceptual phase, we do not need a photo in this case. It could be a screen cap of a rendering. It could be could also be a sort of systems diagram type of. But it's really we're looking at this to validate that you have something tangible that matches what you had said that you were working on within that question 2 of the entry form. Team photo. So this is rather self-explanatory. And so, yeah, we're just looking for either a photo of team members or the team, or even an image that you think is representative of your team. This is really for less so for the reviewers, more so for potential future marketing once we come to the finalist level of the challenge. All right, the market slide. So this slide is, and the intention with this is to give reviewers an idea both of the potential of your technology in Ontario, both of the potential for revenue by a company that may be created around the deployment of the technology that you're proposing, and also, again, your potential to help meet that greenhouse gas footprint reduction that is the core intention of the challenge. So, and this is if you are developing an application around an industry that is not currently regulated. This would be the section in which you can provide that, where you can back up and say that this sector that I am focusing my technology on does have a significant footprint in Ontario, and it is important to address to help meet future emissions targets. And so we're looking for these measures both, and I would say that primarily we're looking for an estimate of these measures in Ontario, but we're also looking for the global potential as well too. And so you could work from the global level and work down to Ontario, or sort of, and again, this doesn't need to be, this could be just sort of basic market research, and you can extrapolate based on the number of similar facilities that are in Ontario. So it doesn't have, you can do it very easily, and we're just looking for an estimate. But I think that it is important for the reviewers in being able to assess the potential of the technology that you're speaking about. And then also a proposed work plan for phase 2. So if you are awarded the funds to move on in this phase 2, what would you do with those funds over the next 10 months to execute a project? And then this is just to give the reviewers sort of an idea at this phase. We'll also be asking for a more detailed version of a work plan if you're invited to if you're one of the top 20 teams invited to pitch. All right, so that concludes that PowerPoint. So I'm just going to hop back into my initial presentation and sort of try and wrap this up as quickly as possible so that we can get on to the Q&A. And as I said, we'll be able to run that Q&A after 11 a.m. as I know we're getting tight on time. So the challenge assessment criteria, these are available in the challenge guidelines. As you're developing your entry, I highly suggest that you refer back to these assessment criteria and make sure that you're trying to hit some of these bases to really provide a good value case for your entry. So what are the reviewers looking for when they're assessing these opportunities? They're looking for the entry that you're describing, what is the fit with the challenge statement? They're looking at the technology that you're proposing. Is it transformational while still being rational and having a good basis and support in in science and in what can be practically implemented. What is the capacity of your team to be able to deliver the work plan and really to be able to bring this technology to the next stage? And also, what is the potential of the technology? So what is the potential of the market to generate revenue? And what is the potential of, again, what is your technology's potential to help Ontario meet greenhouse gas reduction targets? Next steps is the entry deadline on the 22nd of September at midnight. So you have until midnight on next Friday, and I will be awake and available to help, but please do try and submit your entries well ahead of that midnight deadline in case there's any technical problem. After this entry deadline, we bring the applications in for a partner review panel. So the initial stage of review will be completed by OCE sort of like organizations from around Canada. We've sourced expert reviewers from other innovation organizations who are going to be looking at these entries and then ranking the top 20. So those top 20 entries will then be invited to submit a full proposal. And the full proposal is not much more detailed than, in terms of content, is not much more detailed than the initial entry. It just may be, you may be requested by the review panel to address some gaps, and you will also be requested to develop a budget and a more rigorous work plan so that we can apply some due diligence. Then you'll do your submission. We will do an internal sort of due diligence on what you're proposing as your work plan and your budget. There'll be a technology pitch to an external panel, and then the notification of awards and contracting, and the commencement of phase 2. So the execution of the projects that have been proposed through this review process. I think this table should be familiar to everyone. So this is the challenge structure. So right now we're approaching the entry deadline for phase 1 and looking to award the funds that could be used to execute projects in phase 2 to then be evaluated at that phase. And now we are ready for questions. So I have a couple of people who are here in the room who have been pulling questions both off of and again, so you can submit your questions either by the chat box to the left of the Skype window, or you could submit them by email to the Solutions 2030 email address. Okay. So the first question is, could you go over question 3 in the entry form? I believe you may have skipped it. Sorry about that. So let's just go back to, I'm just going to open up my, so let's go back and take a look at question number 3. Oh, target customers. Oh, apologies. This is a really important question. I can't believe I jumped over that one. So describe your target customers in 250 characters, sorry, 2,500 characters or less. So again, this is really root this in Ontario. Who are your target customers in Ontario? You can talk to specific sectors. You can talk to specific companies. You do not need to have these, you do not need to have existing relationships with these customers to apply for the challenge. We're just looking that you've done your market research into the Ontario context and that you are really showing that your technology has the potential to be applied here. Yeah, what's your value proposition to those customers? Again, aside including the your potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which has value in Ontario, what else can you offer them in terms of maybe convenience or saleable byproducts, or what other sort of aspects are there that make your technology appealing? Is your technology transferable to other sectors in Ontario? You'll notice that in the assessment criteria on the challenge guidelines, the ability for technologies to be able to be implemented in multiple sectors is advantageous. We want to be able to see technologies that can be scaled to help reduce emissions in as many parts of the economy as possible. So being able to show scalability a great attribute in an application, and we encourage you to speak about this where you can. And what is the global potential? So this is, again, getting back to that idea of the global market. If we solve this, if you're able to solve this challenge and help Ontario to solve this challenge, how can this act as a jumping off point, or where are the next places that you would be able to implement the technology? All right, and so I hope that resolves questions around number 3. Should we need to subcontract services not available in Ontario and in Canada? Would it be possible to spend some of the granted money abroad? Some technologies cannot easily be developed without recurring to abroad, highly specialized consulting services. All right, and I hear that one, and that's a question that comes up frequently. So the way that I would respond to this is that we do want to see the OCE, or the challenge portion of the budget, to be spent on the work to be done in Ontario, but the matching funding that is coming into the project does not fall under that same requirement. So for the team-based funding, you could use that to contract services outside of Ontario, but for the Ontario-based funding, we're looking for you to spend that on things like the integration of the technology here, paying salaries. It could be with the consulting services and stuff that exist here in Ontario, but we do want to see that those funds be spent in Ontario. If you are selected as one of the top 20 teams to proceed in the challenge, you could make a request, and if you're able to create a very clear case as to why this funding that what you are trying to procure does not exist in Ontario, we can grant exceptions. They aren't guaranteed, but again, I'm glad that you're asking about this early in the competition. If it affects your intention to apply, but we'll be developing the full budgets at the full application stage, at which point we would be able to request the variances in the spending and get a little bit more in depth about how this funding would flow and how this would work. How long after the eligible expenses can we expect to be refunded? Okay, so this is, and I'm assuming that this means, okay, so I guess there's 2 ways to answer this. So one is how, like, I guess when can spending occur that would be refunded? And so the answer to that is any spending that occurs after the notification of our intention to fund the project is eligible for reimbursement. So after we send our award letter to the teams that will be proceeding through to phase 2, any expenses that you accrue after the time of that notification of award are eligible for reimbursement, though there is a window between when we notify you about our intention to fund and when you execute the agreement with us to really contract the funding. That spending within that window is at your discretion, in case, like, there is a risk that maybe something goes sideways and we're unable to execute that contract, in which case the funding agreement is would not be in place, and we would not be able to reimburse the expenses. So the answer to that in terms of the timing is anytime post-award, between the post-award and the end of phase 2 is eligible for reimbursement, but there is that little window between award and contracting that would be spending at your own discretion. Another way to answer that would be, like, how long after you submit expenses would you expect to be reimbursed on those claims? I know that this, so I don't have a precise answer on that for you, but I do know that we're running other programs in a similar manner in OCE right now, and I believe that the reimbursement process is relatively quick. I want to say I'm tentative about giving an exact time estimate, but definitely less than a month. I think it's in the order of a week or two, as long as everything that's submitted is in order and our finance team is able to quickly make the assessment. It does happen relatively quickly. So if an international application gets selected, can the presence in Ontario for executing the project be established through an Ontario-based subsidiary of the parent company? Yeah. So as long as so if it's an international company, if you do currently have a subsidiary or a footprint here, as long as you can show that the work is being executed here in Ontario, and I guess like we would probably want to see that the presence here in Ontario is more than just like a sales office of a company. We would want to see because we would be expecting you to execute the project. We would want to see some capacity to be able to do research and development or the like. But yeah, so I think there may be in that scenario, there may be we may have to develop a plan in terms of how we would contract that if the funds were flowing to the subsidiary. But there should be no problem as long as during the duration of the project you have a presence here in Ontario and are able to work on the scope of work of the project. So once a team gets selected to proceed to phase 2, how and when does the $250,000 get granted to the team? So I think this was touched on briefly in one of the previous questions around the reimbursement model. So if a team is selected to proceed or to be awarded the $250,000, so there's a few steps in this. The first step would be, so after this sort of initial assessment phase of the open entry forms, we will invite the top 20 teams to come back and do a pitch. Part of that pitch will be developing a full or a more fulsome budget for proposed use of funds on the project or scope of work to be executed in phase 2. So when you're developing your budget, we want these budgets to be realistic and executable. You can leverage within that budget up to $250,000 of OCE cash, but also understanding that many of the companies and researchers that may be applying for the challenge might not have access to that sort of capital to do the matching. Do make sure that your budgets are realistic. So based on the budget that's submitted as part of that full application, that would be the amount, the total budget amount that's submitted as part of that full application. That would be the amount that we would contract with you for as we proceed into phase 2. So we would contract with we'll contract with the teams for the intention to deliver to them the full amount of the proposed budget, and then the cash is actually allocated through a reimbursement basis. So at the beginning of, at the time of the notification of award and contracting, you would not get a lump sum check for our contribution to the project. You will need to go through the duration of the contract, and as you spend, you can submit your sort of proof of payment for project costs that align with the budget to OCE, and then we will reimburse you 50% of the spending as long as it aligns with what you had initially proposed. Can individual inventors apply for the challenge, or is it reserved only for companies with a certain number of employees? If so, what is the minimum employee number required? So this is, individual inventors can absolutely apply for the challenge. There is no minimum number of employees to be held at a company. It is not like many of our other OCE programs are also similar to organizations, other Canadian organizations like NSERC and IROP. Many of these programs have a restriction on the, I guess, and it's to assess maturity of a company, but have restriction on the number of employees that a company must have to be eligible. That is not the case with this challenge. We are open to very early stage technologies and inventors. That being said, if an inventor is selected or if you are an inventor who is selected as one of the sort of top 8 that we then will want to contract with, we cannot contract and execute the agreement with an individual. We would need to do that with, you would need to have a business number or develop a business number before we would be able to contract with you. But that doesn't mean that business doesn't have to have been in existence for a certain number of years or have a certain number of employees. Your assessment criteria says transformative, game-changing technology. Are you looking for bleeding-edge innovations, and will these be given extra consideration over enabling technologies? All right, so this is, I guess, and it's part of our own fault for using such sort of jargony terminology within our assessment criteria, but absolutely, we're looking for bleeding-edge technologies, and novelty is an important part of what we're looking for in terms of what we're looking to fund under this initiative. This initiative, unlike unlike the other parts of our target greenhouse gas program, is the very forward-looking. So it's looking at not what is necessarily ready to be deployed today and right now, because those technologies, they're also for technologies that are proven and are ready to be scaled and deployed. Even within our target GHG program, we have a mechanism to support those technologies that already exist through our Stream 1 program. This Solutions 2030 is really looking for what are the next step technologies and what are the sort of bleeding edge technologies, and this is your opportunity to propose something like that under this challenge. So I would say that absolutely bleeding edge, but also rooted in you also have to have the capacity to, or be able to show the capacity to deliver that bleeding edge. So we want transformational, but we also want to be able to show a clear vision or path to be able to utilize the funding that we're offering and bring it really to the next step. All right, so now I've got some questions from email. So what is the best way to answer question 6 of the technical write-up? Do you mean what makes your team skilled experience education make us worthy to win, or what it makes the team worthy of winning based on our idea? In this question, we're really looking at the team. So it's what experience do you have? What sort of backgrounds do you have? How do the different team members and they could be team members as individuals or team members as organizations, but how will you work sort of synergistically, and how do you build on each other's strength to develop full support and capacity for what you're proposing? Yeah, and then also the other part of that's within that question 6 is don't forget about what other expertise can you leverage? Can you leverage relationships that you have with academic institutions, with innovation sort of support communities, with we want to be able to see that you're sort of connected in and have the support to move things forward. So 3, I was wondering if there are any limits for the Solutions 2030 PowerPoint presentation. Must it be only 7 pages like the one outlined, or can it be a limit like 50 slides, or is there no limits? Well, I hope from the perspective of from the reviewer perspective, 50 slides might be a little bit excessive, but we are okay with you adding additional slides as long as they help you to answer what we're looking for within that document. So if you have multiple images that show the sort of state of development of your technology, please feel free to add a couple of more slides to clearly show the readiness level of your technology. If you have additional diagrams that you think help put your technology into context, please feel free to add a few more slides. If you want to propose a very, very detailed work plan and you want to put that over a few slides, that also, we're very open. And also the market slide, if you want to expand on that as well too. So add in, but try not to add in additional content. And remember, this is not a pitch deck. We're asking for you to respond to specific questions. So you asked for photos of team members. Some of the team members will be contractors who will only sign on after the project is given a go-ahead. Do we allude to them also? Don't worry about that so much. I would just say if you currently are a small team or individual, that's okay. And in terms of team photos, this also could be if you're a company, this could be like the logo of your company. It's really what we're looking for with this is as we're announcing finalists, we're looking for some sort of content and material that we can use to promote the different technologies. That being said, I just also want to reiterate that if we were to release or to release any content about any of the applications, we're very aware that you may have included sensitive information in your applications. We would clear anything with you before putting it out into the world. Can we embed videos or links or YouTube into slides? Yeah, of course. So if you want to, if you think you think that it best shows the state of development of your technology to put a video in, absolutely embed a YouTube link. Any of the reviewers who are taking a look at these applications will be internet connected, so that's fine. The other thing to remember as well too is on the final page of the entry form, you also have space to add in some supplemental information. So down here you could put links to things like YouTube. Oh, somebody is all right, that's done. So you could put links to content like YouTube videos. If your technology is sort of rooted in a scientific concept, or if you're an academic who's published a paper, you could put a link to access a paper or an abstract. You could add in documents, team websites, or anything that you think helps to support your application. We also have space up here for you to include supplemental files that you think would help to support what you're proposing in your application. Again, the content in the supplemental files and links isn't mandatory. It's at your own discretion. We're just looking for anything you think that can really help to support what you're proposing. But my one piece of advice about including this additional content is that if you think that something that you have included here as supplemental content is crucial for the reviewers to see as part of making their assessment, do ensure that you mention it in the body of your application. So if you are including a YouTube video or a paper that you think really proves the concept of what you're trying to do, you may, in that question 1 where we're asking you to talk about your technology, to just sort of mention, please see attachments this. And it doesn't have to be like it, but just reference them out to it. Another thing that I found has been useful for many teams to include as an attachment might be a list of references. So if you have done a lot of market research in the preparation of your questions and you don't want to use your word count within the text box to provide those references, you could create a document and attach it at the end that sort of has all of the citation sources if you're going to go that in depth. So does the entry form recognize symbols, italic, bold, etc.? No, it does not. So be aware of that when you're developing your entry, that this is not, that the form that we're using is not very smart. It does not recognize different formatting. It does not accept photos, it does not accept pictures, does not accept tables. And so this is why some of that supplemental information has been asked for in that PowerPoint deck. So that's the importance of the PowerPoint. Again, if there is something that you want to include, and I'm also thinking specifically about when you're looking at that question 5 and the equation. There isn't, like, this form does not accept equations. That might be, if you want to do a more sort of rigorous job on those and attach that as an attachment, as a supplemental piece of information, that could be very helpful. All right, so I think, we've got one more question. So phase 2 of the challenge will require teams to build a lab-scale technology prototype in a controlled environment and will be evaluated based on prototype performance and the team's vision to scale their technology to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. However, we've already built our lab-scale prototype. What other way can the money be spent? Okay, so that's a great question, actually. So now, in the guidelines, so I guess the best way to describe this is that, so with the diversity of the different types of technologies that we'll be applying for this challenge, I think the definitions of prototype, demonstration will vary. So, for example, what we would expect to see in a phase 2 scope of work for, say, a software solution may be very different from what we would want to see in the scope of work from a technology that is that aims to be a very large sort of industrial scale, like physical implementation in a plant. When it comes to the proposing a scope of work for phase 2, really the best way to think about it is, what is the next natural step? Like, what is a contained project? So we would want to be able to see it have sort of a beginning and end, and we would want to see sort of a scope of work to be executed in that sort of either iterates, develops, demonstrates the technology that you're pitching. But what's the next natural step that your customers for your technology would want to see that you can execute with the amount of money that we're proposing to allocate in phase 2? So keeping in mind that for some types of technologies, like say a software technology, a project with the OCE leverage of up to $500,000, that could significantly move a technology forward. Whereas if you are looking at a technology that's proposed to be a bolt-on that is like integrated into a cement plant, $500,000 for a pilot may not actually go as far. So it's really, what is a self-contained project? We would want to see you execute a scope of work that sort of is developing and it doesn't necessarily need to be a lab scale prototype. It could be, but we want to see, a contained project that's the next natural step in the development of your technology. So, next question, is $250,000 part of the $750,000 if my team goes to say phase 3, or do we get $500,000 after $250,000? So the $750,000 that would be awarded as part of phase 3 is in addition to the $250,000. The $2 million grant prize is in addition to the other prizes that had already been awarded. So in total, if you are the successful challenge winner, you would be able to leverage up to $3 million throughout the duration of the challenge. So the last page of the PowerPoint presentation asks milestones of our phase 2 projects for 10 months. Is this project commence with $250,000 or with $750,000? So the scope of work to be executed and evaluated in phase 2 is the scope of work to be funded with the $250,000 of Solutions 2030 Challenge cash. At the end of phase 2, we're going to evaluate the project and make the decision to allocate the $750,000. So the scope of the work plan that you're proposing is really and the pitch that you're making right now is for that $250,000. So in question number 6, are you looking for bios or general competencies? I would say that that's I would say that's up to you, depending on what you think fits in with the character count. Just ensure that if you're including bios, that what you're speaking of is relevant to what you're proposing within the proposal. And again, really goes back and shows your capacity and experience to be able to deliver on what you're proposing. All right, and I think that concludes the questions that we've received online. And all right, and I'm sorry, I was just checking my email. But so I think that concludes all the questions that we've received through our email address and also through the Skype window. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I hope that this has been helpful in helping you to get a sense of really what we're looking for, and also giving you some tips on how to frame your application, delving into some of these application questions. I want to remind everyone that I'm available to help if you have any questions about the challenge or how to further frame your application, or if when you're getting into the nitty-gritty of things, if you are looking for advice on how to develop some of those calculations based on your technology, or if you want some suggestions sort of around how to frame the target market, I'm happy to help with that. So do let me know if you need any help over the next few days, but I look forward to seeing entries coming in next Friday. And thank you everyone for attending.